Hey, good afternoon, guys. Hope you're doing well. And I buzzed over to East Lansing, Michigan, coming to you live here from the Jack Breslin Center. Surprisingly, I didn't have a problem getting in. I took knocking on a lot of doors and checking door handles, and I finally found an open door. And surprisingly, lights were on, and I wanted to get a workout in today. I think that's important, particularly these days as we're doing a lot of sitting around. So I said, what better place to come than to Sparty Land and get a quick workout and get some shots up. I got to keep sharp, you know. I might get asked to play on an intramural team or something like that. So I want to keep my skills sharp. And Coach E might pull me up. You just never know for next year. So just sitting here kind of recounting probably my favorite memory of the year at Breslin. Maybe you guys remember when the Nittany Lions came in and punched Sparty in the mouth, got the win, and got out of here. It was kind of a cool thing. So here's what I'm going to do with Chapter 9. I'm going to pull up my slideshow, and I'm going to do it differently. This is actually take 2, if you can believe that. I went through the slides, all 18 of them, and it took me 30-plus minutes. And I'm figuring out I think that that's too long. So what I'm going to do is take, no more than 10 minutes here, maybe less. We'll see how it goes, and run through my slides with you. I'm doing it in presenter mode as well. You can see my notes over here. So I'm just going to hit on a handful of the slides, and I'm going to talk about, frankly, the links that are in some of these, that are in my deck, and encourage you to go out and take a look at some of the articles that are tied to what we're talking about. But ultimately, we're specifically talking about promotional concepts in Chapter 9 here. And just a reminder, the two big notions that we're dealing with this semester are sales and marketing within the sport community, within the world of sport itself, products, and so forth. And then secondly, the idea of using sport to build my brand, to build my business, to grow my sales, et cetera, et cetera. And that's an important part of it. And people are quickly learning in our world that sports are a great avenue in order to do that. So as we look at Chapter 9, we're going to be talking through the promotional mix and the tools at our disposal. And the typical ones are that we know are advertising, personal selling, sales promotions, public community relations, which is more of an indirect one, and then sponsorships. And so I'm going to run through these slides, and you can take the time to kind of read through my notes. And this, in collaboration with going through the chapter, should be helpful as we do this online format and do it a little bit differently than we would in class, where we would have more time and so forth. But this was kind of an interesting article. I would encourage reading it. And it talks about the sponsorship component of the NBA All-Star Weekend. And I think one of our classmates was there this year, so he could certainly speak to this. That would be an interesting thing to have him kind of talk through this a little bit. But all of the different things that they do, and activities, sponsorships, fan engagement type of things to build the brand and what goes on at All-Star Weekend. But that's an example of what the NBA is doing in the promotional mix relative to building their brand and growing their brand. You can read through some of these slides. This is an important slide in the sense that this is the process of communication. As you think about promotions and advertising and selling and marketing, there's a process that how you are going to communicate, what you're communicating, what platforms, what channels, what mediums you're communicating through, how it's being received. Is this going to be an emotional appeal? Is this going to be a factual appeal? All of those things. And then tying in, you can see on the right side, the noise or the distractions to your message, and then feedback, things like sales, market research, all tie into that whole process on how you're communicating, because promotions is about communicating your brand and your message. This was an interesting one. As you think about the person, a lot of times in sports, brands will pick a person to be the messenger of what they're communicating in their message. And we're not going to watch it, but kind of a cool part, if you know the Derrick Rose story, catastrophic injury, knee injury, came back, and Adidas tapped him to be kind of the spokesperson for that in Chicago, and kind of a cool way that they did that, and through a pretty credible source. I mean, Derrick Rose, D Rose, is definitely a person of high regard in the NBA, particularly pre-injury, and even the work that he went through to get back. So kind of a cool piece to their messaging. Relative to competition, this is an interesting slide just showing the amount of money, and this goes back 2 years, relative to professional athletes and how much money they are bringing in just on endorsements from brands. Really a interesting list to read through. Good article here on finding the most effective advertising media, the best way to choose that for your particular target in your market. Kind of a recap of that model of communication. And then the second half of kind of this slide deck is about the planning process, how you go about in planning, how you're going to promote your brand and your product and so forth to the consumer. And there's really 4 things that you've got to kind of consider: the target market considerations, the objectives, and what are your objectives, what do you want to communicate, and then the budget that you'll have, and then ultimately making decisions. This final part, developing the promotional mix, is ultimately about, all right, I'm going to make decisions about how I'm going to put my brand out there, how I'm going to communicate my brand, and what's the best way to do that. And again, all of the things that are in this chapter and that we've talked about and we've alluded to: who's going to give the message, how are we going to give the message, where are we going to give it the message, how long are we going to get, all of those types of things are a part of the promotional mix that you have to consider. 2 strategies, definitely take a look at these, because I know ultimately you're going to be responsible for understanding these: the push and the pull strategy as you think about your target market. This is kind of a fun article I would encourage you to read as well. A general manager in a single A baseball team, and I can't remember what city it was in, but he set up this promotion ultimately that if they had a social media post relative to a young boy, I think, who was fighting some level of cancer, and if it got so many, I think, likes or shares or something along those lines, he was going to physically do a prostate exam during the game, not like out in the open for certain, but maybe up in one of the boxes or whatever. So there's just all different ways to think about engaging people. This hierarchy of effects is really an interesting thing, similar to several chapters ago when we were talking about the sports fan. We talked about this psychological continuum model and how we get people to buy in and really show a strong allegiance to our brand. And this is kind of the same thing. This hierarchy moves down the line, but ultimately to get people to take action and in this sense to purchase your brand, purchase your product, purchase your service, and so forth. The minor league, these are always fun to see what some of the minor league teams are doing, particularly in baseball. Baseball does a really good job with that. And if you remember our speaker, Melissa Agee, several weeks ago, that was a part of her job in all of minor league baseball. And a lot of good ideas in there, kind of some funny ones. Sorry, Jared, look at that. We hate the Yankees night. And then ultimately you have to consider how you're going to develop your budget for your promotional strategy, and how much money you're going to spend, how you're going to spend it. And then ultimately to that, this is an interesting graphic as well, just talking through the amount of money that these brands were spending total, which is right here, and then how much of that total they were actually spending in the context of sport. Kind of mind-boggling. So you look at Verizon spending $345 million in 2011, and just 2 years previous, in 2009, that was an increase of 40% of their spending in sport in terms of advertising and promotions. Just kind of a crazy, crazy number if you think about how much those companies are spending. And then ultimately, as I said, it's going to boil down to choosing the right mix for your company, for your organization, for your brand, and how you're going to do that. And it might be some level of all of these. It might only be a couple of them. It might be one of them, but ultimately, as you think through your brand, your target, all of those things, the amount of money that you have, all kinds of factors going into it, but how are we going to spend our dollars to get the right mix and ultimately get return of investment, return on investment for the dollars that we've spent. Great article here on LeBron James leaving Cleveland. Those of you that were old enough to remember that, that was a really big deal in the NBA. And the city of Cleveland was not happy, and particularly the owner of the Cavaliers. He took out a full-page ad in the Cleveland, I can't remember the name of their paper, The Voice or something like that, and just berated LeBron James, knowing that when he left, he was the brand. And so ultimately, Cleveland had to figure out in this integrated idea, how are we going to pull back and figure out how to rebrand ourselves minus arguably the greatest player in our era right now, and perhaps ultimately could be the greatest player of all time, with apologies to MJ. So they had to figure out, and they kind of turned LeBron into the villain, and that they would circle the wagons and kind of pull it together. So great article there relative to this idea of creating a mix and what's our best way to promotionally get that mix just right to get to the point that we're getting the best return and we're rebuilding. In this case, they were rebuilding their brand. And then little infographic, kind of a pathway towards how we ultimately get this competitive advantage, a greater return on investment and so forth, and what that looks like. So I'm going to leave it with that. We're going to stop the slide deck here, the slideshow. Let me encourage you to take the time to go through that, read through the notes, and in collaboration with reading the chapter, I trust that this all kind of comes together for all of us. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. My office hours are available in Moodle, and Monday through Thursday, or if you want to meet individually, I'd be happy to do that. Did I mention that Penn State came in and beat Sparty this year? That was kind of a cool thing. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but sorry, guys. All right. God bless, and take care. And if you need anything, let me know.